All right, so we've talked about how to create variables, and I sort of glossed over something, which was that we can use a mutate to create a variable, or we can use a summarize, or we can use a case event or whatever, but I didn't talk a lot about the actual process of doing that creation. And that's what we're going to be talking about here. In particular, we're going to be talking about some of the kinds of variables that are a bit harder to work with. So there's lots of different kinds of variables in R and in data generally. Things like numeric variables, those are relatively straightforward and easy. You know how to work with numbers, but there are some that are more difficult, which are factors, dates, and strings. Let's talk about how to work with all of those. So these dplyr variables that verbs that we've talked about, summarize, arrange, filter, etc. We need to think about all these, and they can be combined to do all sorts of important stuff. But to use them, we actually have to think about what kinds of variable manipulations we actually have to do. Those are just the tools that allow us to implement the variable manipulations. We have to think about the individual things that we are actually doing. What are we going to feed into our mutates and our summarizes and our filters? And in fact, a lot of data cleaning is simply making an already tidied variable useful. So variable types that could give us a lot of trouble and pop up a lot in R are factors, which are categorical variables. So for example, are you left-handed, right-handed, or ambidextrous? That is a categorical variable. You might store that in your data as a category. Dates are very much big headache causers, and strings are also quite common. First of all, just working with variable types in general, how can you work with variable types? How can you check what kind of variable you are working with? You can use, if you just print out a tibble, which is the kind of data frame that the Tidyverse uses, you can just print it out. It will show you, like, here's a factor variable, here is a double, which is a kind of numeric variable. You can also use is dot to check whether something is a type of variable. So if I say, for example, here's my data, new cons, what do I got? I can tell that this is a character variable, right? So if I do first half, maybe I'll use pull first half, right? This will give me back my first half variable. And I can say, hey, is this a character variable? Is this a string? Yes, it is. I can check now. Another thing that you can do, you can check all the different types. If you do structure, new cons, it will tell you the structure of all the variable types that you have of all of them. Or of course, we talked about vtable before. Another one that I like to use, I don't know why, but sapply, it'll just apply the same function across a bunch of different columns. If I take my data set, let's do construction as a whole. Class, the class function will do it. So class of construction year will tell me that year is a numeric variable. Here I'm going to apply that to every column. Tell me that every single variable's type. Anyway, there's a bunch of other ways you can check column types. You can also use is dot to convert between types. You can use as dot to convert between types. So if I want to turn this person variable, which is currently character, a string variable, into a factor variable, I can do as dot factor. If I want to turn income, which in the original data is a string variable as well, into a number, I can do as dot numeric. So as dot numeric will convert a string or whatever it is into a number. So let's talk about factors first. So the factor function lets you specify I missed something there. So factors are categorical variables. We have certain set number of categories that you can be. There's certain mutually exclusive categories. You are either left-handed or right-handed or ambidextrous. And I could use factor to create a factor variable that has those three categories in it. So if I take a string variable, let's say income here, let's say I've created some bins, 50 to 100,000, less than 50,000. So this by itself is just a string variable. If I look at it by itself, right, it's a set of strings. If I do class and ask it what type of variable it is, it will tell me that it is a character variable, right? Not a factor. I can send it, though, to the factor function, which will turn it into a factor variable. And I can specify the levels of the factor. So I can tell it the order in which the categories go. So I can, by the way, just do factor on its own. This will turn it into a variable with different levels. So the values that I had, like 50 to 100, less than 50, etc., in that order. So I still got the data, but now it's telling me the levels of the data. By default, it will go in alphabetical order. In this case, we probably want the smallest bin to be the smallest. So I'm going to say the levels of the variable go from less than 50K, 50 to 100, and 100K. So factors can be ordered as well as, and so instead of just a string variable, which always goes in alphabetical order, factor variables, you can set the order of them. So if you want some to go in some particular order, I'm repeating myself, but that's basically what you can do. Let's do that here. So let's say take that factor that we just had and we do levels equals this. So now we can see it's the same data. It just now knows that it goes in this order, which can be very handy when we are going to be graphing things, for example. Let's say that I'm doing some sort of calculation by group for these different categories, and then I want to graph it. If I put the ordering here, if I make it a factor variable and put it in the order that I want, it will graph it in the order that I've specified. So you don't end up with a weird graph where it's like it goes medium, high, low in that order for some reason, right? So you can specify the one that you want. So here I have created this factor variable of income. I've specified the levels, and then I've sorted it. And then because I specified the levels, it has sorted it such that the smallest category is first, and then the middle, and then the top. So you do want to make sure that you spell those level labels correctly. If you spell one wrong, then it will sort of convert all the ones that you didn't get right to missing. So for example, if I say less than 50 to 100 and I drop the K there, it will not recognize all the ones that were there. It'll be like, oh, that wasn't one of the categories that you specified. I'm going to get rid of it. Right? So make sure that you spell those categories correctly. Some other neat tools for ordering factors as you might like. The reorder function will reorder the factor according to the values of some other variable. This can be very handy, for example, ordering a set of bars on a bar graph by the height of those bars. So what do I mean by this? Let's take a look at some data. So let's do our construction data. So we might have a variable to convert to factor here, maybe month. And let's say, actually that might be confusing. Let's do a different one. Do our joined data. So our joined data here, let's say that I want to order the departments. So the department is currently a character variable. I want to turn it into a factor variable. So let's do joined data. Let's mutate department into factor department. Right. So now it's a factor variable, and the levels of it will go in alphabetical order by default. But let's reorder it. Let's do a group by department and summarize to get the mean budget equals mean budget. All right, so now we have one value. But let's make it so that it goes in the order of the budget. So the first level is going to be whatever the lowest budget is, and the second level is going to be whatever the highest budget is. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do mutate department. Use reorder department by the value of, let's do negative budget. So it goes highest to lowest budget. So now if I look at joined summarized, let's create that, save that data set. And if I look at the variable by itself, summarized department, it goes in the order sales and R&D because sales had the lowest budget, followed by, the levels go sales and R&D because sales had the highest budget and then R&D had the second highest budget. Notice that it's using this to order the variables. So if I were to say sort things so that the highest budget was on top, arrange by department, you can see that it puts the highest budget on the top and then the second highest budget after that, right? And again, this can be very handy when you're creating something like a bar graph and you want the bars to be ordered by height. In addition to reorder, there's an entire library called forcats that is part of the Tidyverse that has a lot of different convenience functions for working with factors. I don't really use this package all that much, unlike the other two packages I'm about to show you for specific kinds of variables. But if you just look at forcats, : and then it brings up a lot of different kinds of functions that help you work with factors. For example, you can add or drop additional levels. You can expand it. You can lump levels together very easily. So if you are working with factor variables a lot, you find yourself working very hard on something, you might want to look at the forcats library to see if there's a function in there that makes things easier for you. All right, so those are some of the different kinds of variables that are going to give us a lot of trouble, including factors, dates, and strings. I've talked a little bit about factors. In the next couple of videos, I'm going to talk about dates and strings.